Very close to 4 decades ago, a very wise man stood on a very big stage, not very far from here, and made a very astute observation. The relationship, he said, the relationship between the modern university and society is a very complex and a very fragile one. The complexity and fragility stem from the university's dual role as society's servant and as society's critic. The year was 1980. The wise man in question was Harold Shapiro. The stage was Hill Auditorium, and the context, the delivery of his inaugural address as president of the University of Michigan. And that's something only 4 other individuals have done in the near 40 years since, and we have all of them with us today. Now, it is this complex, fragile, dual relationship that lies at the heart of the Presidential Bicentennial Colloquium, the evolving bargain between research universities and society. My name is Sue Alcock, and as bicentennial professors Paul Courant and I have been wrestling with these paradoxical tensions. Research universities are so often hailed as one of the principal glories of the American system of higher education, as economic engine, as talent magnet, as driver of social mobility. And yet their compact, their deal struck with society has from the get-go always been uneasy, always been contested. The ambition of our colloquium is to take stock of the current state of this never simple, ever evolving bargain, and to ask, at a time when evolving appears to be sliding towards devolving or even dissolving, to ask how the crucial relationship between the research university and society in all its complexity and fragility can be strengthened and renewed. So that's what we're here to talk about today, and here's how we're going to do it. Let me run through briefly the order of events. We will begin with remarks by and discussion among the 5 presidents, moderated by Paul Courant. This will be followed by a round of questions kicked off by students from 2 colloquium-related classes. We also invite questions from the audience. You have cards and pencils, do thinking, write it down, pass it to the end of the aisle, and they'll be collected as the Q&A session approaches. After questions, there will be a lightning round in which the presidents will be asked 1 final question for 1 very quick final answer. And then Gary Krenz, Director of Bicentennial Planning, and the person who, with his team, put this event together, for which all gratitude. Gary Krenz will come up here and close things out and send us on to the party. So that's the plan for the day, and we have some of the best, most invested people in the world here with whom to hold this conversation. Some of these individuals are out in the audience, the students of Paul and my seminar, Pub Policy Education 615 Evolving Bargain, shout out. And Gary Krenz's undergraduate class, Philosophy 162, the University of Michigan, a moral institution, question mark. I'd also like to recognize 3 first spouses, Ken Coleman, Ann Duderstadt, and Monica Schwebs. Finally, it's an honor to acknowledge the presence of a member of the Board of Regents, Ron Weiser of Ann Arbor. And now it is time, and my very great pleasure, to introduce my partner in crime, Paul Courant, Interim Provost, Harold T. Shapiro Collegiate Professor, and Presidential Bicentennial Professor. Paul, you take it from here.
Thank you, Sue, and thank you for being such a wonderful colleague and co-conspirator in organizing this discussion and the activities that led up to it, and especially for stepping in with grace and skill when I more or less abandoned my role as co-teacher of our co-taught course. When we started this project, we were well aware that the compact or bargain or relationship between the university, the research university, and society was under increasing stress. We identified a host of issues: accessibility, accountability, research support, a perception that universities are not as businesslike as they should be, a perception that universities are more businesslike than they should be, lack of confidence in the value of the liberal arts, of expertise, of much more, and we settled down to work with students on amplifying these and other issues and related questions leading up to today. We had no idea how much things would change over the course of a year. I would suggest that the bargain between the research university and society is under much greater stress than we imagined it could or would be. As Sue has pointed out, the pace and unpredictability of change combined to make our original framing, that of an evolving bargain, seem naive, both with regard to time and to the nature of the relationship. On one point, however, I think we were prescient. We have brought together 5 thoughtful and articulate leaders in American higher education, the presidents of the University of Michigan for nearly the last 40 years, who have also been the presidents of several other great research universities. Who better to reflect on the past and the future of the relationship between the university and society? So I now invite our presidents to come join me on the stage. They need no introduction, and your programs provide brief biographies, so I will be even more brief. We will hear, in order of their presidencies at Michigan, from Harold Shapiro, the 10th president of the University of Michigan, James Duderstadt, the 11th president, Lee C. Bollinger, the 12th president, Mary Sue Coleman, the 13th president, and Mark Schlissel, the 14th president. We have asked the same broad question of each of our presidents. Before I tell you what it is and we start, I want to note that for me, as the Harold T. Shapiro Professor of Public Policy, introducing Harold T. Shapiro just feels great. So we've asked each of our presidents, based on their time at Michigan and their experience since, to speak to a particular issue or event at the university, or a more general issue in which the bargain between the university and society comes to the fore, and to look at the past, the present, and the future. So just a little bit to do in several minutes. Harold?
Oh, thank you very much. It's just so wonderful to be back here in Ann Arbor. I have so many friends out in the audience, I can hardly focus on any serious thoughts that I have, and really focusing on all the memories that just come to my head as I look around at the many faces in this audience. So my friends here of many years, you'll forgive me if I don't take that route and try to respond as best I can to the charge that Paul gave us. You know, it seems natural on this occasion, a great celebration of a great university, to either celebrate the achievements of Michigan's past or to focus on the emerging forces that are likely to shape the future landscape of the University of Michigan over the coming generations. I don't know if you'll be relieved or not, but I will do neither of these things. Instead, in my brief remarks, I will focus on the potent borderlines, situated solidly in the present, but simultaneously pregnant with future possibilities. Indeed, given the national, international circumstances we are all familiar with, my choice is to say a few words about a very particular aspect of the emergent future as I see it. However, I cannot return to Ann Arbor without taking a moment to acknowledge the extraordinary leadership of my successors as president of the university. Presidents Duderstadt, Bollinger, Coleman, and Schlissel, who are here with us today, have all played and are continuing to play key roles in bringing this distinguished university to new levels of achievement and vitality. Of course, many challenges remain, but future generations of students and faculty will owe a great deal to this leadership quartet composed of the four most recent presidents of the University of Michigan. Now, however, to the borderlands between the present and the immediate future. To begin with, and I think Paul may have kind of referenced this, it is critical to acknowledge that as a nation, we currently face an environment characterized by such a high level of cultural, social, economic, and political anxiety that we are a bit on edge, at least I feel on edge. Indeed, I sense an unusual level of disquietment or apprehension as we continue both our contemporary challenges and our future prospects. I will focus in my brief remarks on one particular aspect of this national anxiety. For those of us committed to the health and well-being of the world of scholarship and education, it is disheartening to witness the growing prominence of the notion that institutions of all kinds are not to be trusted, that there is little to separate truth from fiction, that there's no reliable way to distinguish knowledge from self-serving and unexamined prejudices. Think about it for a moment. We are currently being asked to believe the following proposition. First, that because we do not know everything, it is legitimate to act as if we know nothing. Second, that because we do not know everything, what we do know or might come to know simply doesn't matter. Third, that since both truth and lies are fabricated narratives, we are free to choose either. Four, that mere politics and prejudice, rather than truth and understanding, will be what shapes our world. That perhaps, fifth and final, that perhaps it would be better if we did not know anything, since the authority of knowledge producers and seekers is either ephemeral or based on a trick. For the research university, as Paul indicated a few moments ago, this is new territory that undermines all our basic commitments in teaching and research. Michigan's commitment to its teaching and research programs rests on a foundational commitment that facts do matter and that centuries of scholarship have created a legacy that continues to contribute to the ongoing vitality of our society. Scholarship can be wrong, but it is seldom wrong for long, and it remains a mighty engine for propelling us to a better life. Moreover, in a liberal democratic society such as our own, it is precisely through the flow of new understandings of science and society that we enhance ourselves and our society. Our society faces many challenges in the years ahead, but authoritarian and exclusionary forms of populism will not help us meet these challenges. Moreover, undermining the authority of institutions and the integrity of those occupying roles within these institutions threatens the foundation of a modern liberal state and the future of the research university. I understand that individuals and their liberty and welfare are the ultimate source of political legitimacy in a liberal democracy. However, in a modern liberal democracy, our hopes and aspirations also depend on the legitimacy and effectiveness of institutions we have constructed that bind us all together. One of the often overlooked characteristics of a well-functioning modern liberal democracy is to maintain a certain level of trust in those separated from us by the social division of labor, but bound to us by cultural, social, and economic norms that ensure together we will serve the national interest. In the modern world, there is no alternative to the social division of labor, and in such a world, institutions must continue to play a critical role not only for particular instrumental reasons, but to protect us against the excessive use of power by individuals and or other institutions. It is certainly true that our institutions sometimes fail us. It is certainly true that there is some understandable discontent with the current social and political order. It is certainly true that the world of scholarship has not always lived up to its responsibilities. It is certainly true that some justifiably fear that they have lost their bearings somewhere in the spinning vortex created by the dynamic forces currently propelling science, technology, industry, and government forward. All of society's institutions need to do better. But the fact that we have senior public officials doing what they can to undermine our trust in institutions and the individuals working within them is a very ominous trend indeed. It is often forgotten, and I've just mentioned it a few moments ago, that one of the roles of an institution within a modern liberal democracy is to serve as a restraint on the inappropriate exercise of power by another institution or person. Thus, the courts can restrain the power of even the most powerful institution or individual. The university, through its role as society's critic, can restrain the power of entrenched ideas of all kinds. The Congress can restrain the power of the executive branch, and so on and so on. The challenge for us all is to transform rather than undermine society's key institutions so that a river of trust can run through them and unite us all in one mighty stream, carrying us all towards a better tomorrow. There is much concern in the scientific community today that public or government just does not understand the contribution of scholarship to the continuing vitality of our society. What many say follows from this is that scientists should become better communicators. There may be something worthwhile in this suggestion, although I doubt it. But far more important is to turn our attention to the transformation and strength of our most important institutions so that they can continue to serve us and justify the trust that we have in them. In this particular challenge that lies immediately before us, in what I have termed the dynamic borderlines or borderlands between the present and the future, I am sure the University of Michigan will continue to play its traditional leadership role, and others will assemble here in Ann Arbor to celebrate the continued leadership of the University of Michigan as it celebrates its 300th anniversary. Thank you, and go blue.
Thank you, President Shapiro. And now we'll hear from President James Duderstadt.
I'm going to take a somewhat more historical and Michigan-centric approach to this question because exactly 25 years ago, Harold and I were seated in a similar group, a similar experience, with Harlan Hatcher, Robin Fleming, and Alan Smith to celebrate the 175th anniversary of the university. Actually, if you're interested in that and would like to compare it, several days ago I found out that the Bentley Library had just finished digitizing that, and working with Terry McDonald and Brian Williams, 2 hours ago we managed to get it online. So if you go to the Bentley Library website and look for digital resources, you can see that there were two very young-looking people that looked like they were almost students sitting next to these very distinguished former university presidents. Actually, during my years as provost and president, all of those presidents were on campus and available. They provided 4 decades of experience, of consultation, of advice, and warnings to me on many, many different occasions. And actually beyond that, I worked with yet another president, not of Michigan, but of Cornell, Frank Rhodes, because I chaired his advisory committee when he was provost of the university. Hence, I have to tell you at the outset that essentially everything I know about the trade of university leadership is due entirely to the wisdom and lessons I learned from these experienced former Michigan leaders. But the agenda in my tenure as Michigan president also followed the trails that they blazed. So how would I characterize the evolving bargain between the university and society during my years as president? Actually, here I would adopt a phrase that Frank Rhodes used to use to describe Cornell University as a privately supported but publicly committed institution. Now, Michigan is positioned right across the dividing line from Cornell between public and private institutions. And therefore, it's perhaps not surprising that for the past half century, Michigan has also faced the challenge of evolving into a similar paradigm of a privately supported but publicly committed university as our state support has declined and our public responsibilities have increased. More specifically, our challenges have been first, to develop a financial paradigm that could address the disappearance of state support, and second, to sustain our fundamental mission, which I'll put in the words of President Angell, to provide an uncommon education for the common man. In facing this challenge during my years as Michigan president, I naturally turned to earlier Michigan presidents for advice and guidance. Harold Shapiro, both as provost and as president, not only taught me leadership skills, but he also passed along the strategy for accommodating the tragic loss of state support through cost containment, fundraising, and careful management, but even more important is the key to make a commitment to achieving excellence as our primary objective as we went through that transition. I also have to confess, in his last few months, he recruited and passed on to me a remarkable CFO in Ferris Womack, who found that $200,000 or $200 million of our endowment was invested in the National Bank of Detroit, not making much interest. And so he pulled that out, combined it with some of the money the deans had hidden under their rug, and transformed it over the next 10 years into a $2.5 billion endowment, which is now approaching $10 billion, easily compensating for our loss of state support. I might also note that largely because of Harold Shapiro's leadership, we set out on a trajectory that by the mid-1990s, Wall Street gave us the highest credit rating for the first time for a public university. From another former Michigan president, Robin Fleming, I learned the rare skill of listening, respecting, and working with students, faculty, and staff, particularly activists, on important university agendas. This proved quite important in addressing the public mission of the institution during my years through agendas such as the Michigan Mandate, the Michigan Agenda for Women, and the adoption of gay rights for our campus. Doubling Black, Hispanic, and Native enrollments, hiring over 150 outstanding minority faculty members, many of whom went on to leadership positions both at Michigan and other institutions, breaking through the glass ceiling that placed women in key leadership positions throughout the university as deans and executive officers, persuading the regents with the help of deans like Lee Bollinger to put in policies that would protect gay rights and provide security and respect for the university's gay communities, and continuing the Michigan tradition that had gone on for many years, that no Michigan resident student would ever have to drop out of this institution for financial need. It's also important another group should be identified that was very important in building that community to take us forward. And these were the partners of these presidents. Ann Duderstadt, Vivian Shapiro, Sally Fleming, Aileen Smith, Ann Hatcher. They were all involved in important agendas, building communities, helping with the agendas of the university, and in fact managing very complex projects for the university. While I'm thanking presidents, I have to thank one more president, but unfortunately he's not from Michigan, or maybe it is fortunate he's from Michigan. That was Gordon Gee, who was president of Ohio State during the years I was president. Gordon was really kind to us by hiring a benevolent coach of the Buckeyes that just enjoyed losing to us 7 times during my presidency. Hence, while the 1990s were, I think, very interesting and challenging years, they were also extremely productive because of the wisdom and the achievements of my predecessors.
Thank you, President Duderstadt. President Bollinger.
So it's a great, great joy to be here. I'm here just for this, and I have to leave right afterwards. I just had too much going on at this particular point in time. I want to say something mostly about my love and affection for this institution. Then I'll say something about the topic, but the topic doesn't interest me as much as my feelings about the institution. Jean really wishes she could be here and wanted me to say that. We came here and we were 27 years old and were picked up at the airport. I'd never been to Michigan before. Jean and I had grown up in the West, and the first question we asked in the car was, how close are the mountains? And I assumed that because Michigan was up near the Canadian border and I knew that Canada had mountains, that they had to be close by. Didn't intend to stay. Thought this would be a wonderful place to start life, and then we spent over 25 years here. We raised our family, we made friends. This was our life. I think this is what Michigan, the University of Michigan, does best. I think it takes young people, it brings them into the intellectual life, but it does so in a very special way. And the link to the topic, what is the relationship between great research universities and the public interest, public service, I think it's just inculcated into the people here right from the start. You know it's a public university that has so many intangible things about it, but you absorb it. I believe strongly that public universities have been the source of great advances in our understanding of issue after issue of social importance. And I think that it's a combination of this personal relationships that are formed, the familial-like atmosphere, and this sense of public service that is utterly unique to these great universities, but especially to the University of Michigan. So our life went on, and in the context of the law school, it was the best intellectual experience of my life. People like Joe Sachs and Terry Sandalow, and there was a whole, were our leaders in a sense intellectually, and then a whole cohort of younger people, Joe Vining, who is here, Jim Adams is here, many others I could name. I mean, this was a sense of intellectual cohesion, excitement that is very, very hard to describe, very hard to do, but it happened very naturally. My wife, Jean, formed relationships that are lifelong. Margaret Evans, I don't know if she is here, but of course, a deep and close friend. There are many others. People that I worked with in the offices, secretaries, assistants, and so on. Remember everybody with great fondness. Something about the topic. I actually believe, and I've used the quote many, many times, a quote from Edmund Burke, that you really can't have, the gist of it is you can't have a love of humankind unless you start with a deep sense of love and affection for the people immediately around you. So I think these things actually are connected. In my time as president here, of course, the issues are fairly well known. The affirmative action cases consumed 5-6 years of my life. I believe still deeply that the university has done the right thing. I believe the institution should be as proud of that achievement as anything that I can think of in the century. Many of the things, Life Sciences Institute initiative, the Arts Initiative, the Arthur Miller Theater concept, on and on, I think were very important. Arising out of this sense of Michigan, University of Michigan, and its relationship to public service, I have developed over time. As I've grown older, I've come to two very strong beliefs. One is that we have to be in alignment, more or less, with human needs and issues, And I've come to believe that we are not in proper alignment today. And that is in part because the world has changed so rapidly, a function of economic integration around the world, communications technologies, movements of people, many other causes have changed the world so rapidly that I think our subjects, our intellectual, scholarly subjects, are no longer completely in alignment, and we need to work on that. My own example is free speech, free press. So I'm an expert on the First Amendment. I know everything there is to know about free speech, free press in the United States from a constitutional perspective, but suddenly the world has changed and now it's a global system of free expression. There are many ways to articulate that phenomena, but how do I change my field? How do I become a global expert? That's not easy. It's not happening as rapidly as it should. And the last thing is that I've come to believe that universities have to become more engaged in the political, it's a hard, dangerous word to use, but in the great issues of the time. I think we're built around an individual autonomy, highly decentralized system, which I think produces enormous progress over time. But I see a world that is desperately in need of what universities have. Base of knowledge, objectivity, nonpartisanship, natural commitment to the public interest and public service. And my own sense is that we need to get more organized, work with partners outside the institution on problems that have solutions that can be achieved within a discrete time period. So whenever I think about this issue of alignment, whenever I think about this issue of engagement with issues, I think about my time at Michigan. All that I think about arises out of my experiences here. And I'm here to recognize that and to thank the institution for it.
Thank you, President Bollinger. President Coleman.
Lee, I need your help in Washington. You know, he knows what I mean. I'd like to thank Mark Schlissel for hosting today. And Mark, I want to thank you for our friendship. It has been really important to me, and I enjoy the conversations that we have, and I certainly enjoy seeing what's happening at my beloved university. And Paul and Sue, thank you for guiding this colloquium, and certainly my predecessors, Harold, Jim, and Lee. You made this university into the great place that it was and made it so attractive for me to want to come. So each of our presidencies, I know this, was confronted with decisions that had the potential to change not only the University of Michigan, but also higher education and society overall. That's the great thing about the University of Michigan. One of these decisions during my tenure was the initiative to digitize the holdings of our vast library and make our books accessible to the world. In 2002, alumnus Larry Page, the co-founder of Google, said he would like to digitize the University of Michigan library, which held 7 million volumes then. When I got over my shock that anybody could even think about doing this, the Google Book Project was announced with great fanfare in December of 2002. 4 universities were involved, with Michigan being the lone public university and the only university that was in it as deeply. The crux of this project was that great library collections would now be searchable for anyone in the world with an internet connection. Michigan had a strong record of digitizing and sharing library materials already, even before Larry Page came to us. Well before Google Books, we were digitizing between 5,000 and 8,000 volumes every year. One of the early initiatives was the Making of America project that we did with Cornell University, using primary sources from 1850 to 1876. I always like to share a success story from that project because I think it tells you the potential. It involves the 1860 book, Bees and Beekeeping, a seemingly obscure work that as a printed piece had little demand here at Michigan, a research university without an agriculture school. But it turned out that the Bible of beekeeping, with business advice dispensed before the Civil War, was still perfectly applicable to today's beekeepers, who continually download the article since it is now available to them online. So it was natural for us to immediately and enthusiastically embrace the Google Book Project. Society turns to its universities for the printed word because books are the foundation of our institutions. We're the repository for the whole of human knowledge, and we must safeguard it for future generations. From the current to the ancient, we must make all information discoverable to faculty, to students, and the public. The Google Book Project led to lawsuits from book publishers concerned that we were violating their copyrights and giving away the store. And we knew these lawsuits would happen when we got into the endeavor. We do have deep respect for intellectual property. It is our #1 product. That respect extended to protecting copyrights and protecting all copyrighted materials in the archive. Still, the legal battles were lengthy, but Google and universities like ours prevailed. The Google Book Project also led, subsequently, to the Hathi Trust. The Hathi Trust is the largest digital library in the world, with more than 120 participating institutions, including Michigan. It has led to unprecedented collaborations and the largest extant collection of digital works for those with disabilities. This is a feature that's often overlooked in discussions about the benefits of the trust. Scholars can have access to works through the Hathi Trust or googlebooks.com. What have these initiatives done for us and for the world? All works in the public domain are completely available and readable online. If you want to read Dickens, you can find the volume and read it. You can read it in Ann Arbor, Azerbaijan, or Amsterdam. By digitizing today's books through our own efforts and in partnership with others, we are protecting the written word for all time. It is an educator's dream knowing that the vast body of information held in the great libraries of the world will be universally searchable, and in the case of public domain works, accessible. If the work is still in copyright, you can search but not read the full text online. For pure academic purposes, we wish we could make the copyrighted works available in full text to qualified academics. The vast majority of these works are not commercially viable. We argue that they are now virtually hidden. So by making them available online, we would expose them to the possibility of commercial success, and that is why the beekeeping story is so powerful. However, in order to create this access, the trust would have to work publisher by publisher. So perhaps this is the next challenge, and Mark, we are looking to you. Because in doing so, the world would be a better place for both publishers and for scholars, and society overall is the ultimate benefactor. Thank you.
Thank you, President Coleman. President Schlissel.
So, can I speak from here? Is that okay? So,
Yeah.
I'll try to make a transition perhaps to making the panel more informal. And out of deference to the fact that you all get to hear me again and again and again, I'll be briefer than my colleagues that have a great emotional link to Michigan, and you don't get to see them very often, so that's purposeful. I point out the obvious when I say that any success that I have during the period I'm privileged to lead this institution is built on the work of the colleagues that you see sitting next to me. That's actually the strength of universities like Michigan, and we have this symposium to honor the fact that we're 200 years old. and it consists of generations of scholars building one upon another to build up the strength and breadth and vigor, culture, traditions of this great institution. So this is greatly pleasurable for me because I get to say thank you in person and acknowledge where we are today as the product of the wisdom and hard work of the folks sitting to my right. I also, as a lifelong learner, make a commitment to learn from everybody I encounter, and I'd like to give also a shout out to Mary Sue to embarrass her the way she tried to embarrass me a moment ago. And that is, although I'm only in my 3rd year as president, sometimes I fantasize about what it's like to be an ex-president. Some days more than others. Mary Sue could actually write a book on the way to step down from a lengthy and successful presidency. And what I mean by that is almost the day I arrived, Mary Sue, in effect, disappeared from the community. She purposefully made space for a new person from outside the campus, not someone that had already had Michigan experience and a network and a visibility. She made space for me to establish myself, get known, and really be perceived as the leader of the university, despite the fact that I was building on 12 years of her momentum. But that's only half of the special story. The other half of the story is while being publicly invisible, she was perpetually available. So whenever any particular issue came up where I needed an ear of somebody that'd been there, done that, and that understood the Michigan culture, she was perpetually available. And I can say that most of the time she said, "Mark, don't worry, you're doing a great job, just keep it up." So that was also an important thing, giving confidence to a first-time president that we were heading in the right direction. So I've filed that away in my notes for the future, so thank you very much, Mary Sue. I took my colleagues, Paul and Sue, at their word, and really chose to speak about an area where our university, many universities, are in the middle of a very conflicting set of political issues in the public space. And I happen to agree with Lee that universities have to be, we are political actors whether we recognize it or not. The challenge is how to speak out on issues of the day that impact quite directly the mission of the university without being subject to the simple and easy criticism that you're a public university, you can't take a political position, or you can't support a party, or you can't support a candidate. And that challenge seems to be coming up more frequently in recent months. What I want to talk about is immigration. And that's a hot button issue of the day. In the public space, our political leaders are talking about clamping down on immigration as a mechanism to make our nation safer. And it's certainly a legitimate worry of the government to make the United States as safe as possible for its citizens. I think the public that we serve, many people, worry that immigration, perhaps from some countries or some parts of the world, make people feel less safe, perhaps make people less safe actually. That's a legitimate view that's held by many people in our society. And I think also many people are concerned in this era of economic insecurity that immigrants may somehow make it harder for them to get a job, for them to compete in the evolving economy of the United States, this globalized economy. So feeling less safe, competing for jobs, that drives the political process, and that's part of what's leading to the discourse from our new government about imposing barriers. But a reason what the universities decided to join with others, of course, and speak out on this issue is at several levels. The first, and in some ways the most empathetic, are students in our community known as DACA students, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, a program introduced by the last administration targeted at young people that were brought here as undocumented immigrants by their parents during their childhood, and that essentially this is the only home they've ever known. And the notion of DACA was an executive action, executive order by the last administration, that basically allowed these folks to come to school and learn and try to build a better life for themselves without worrying about a knock on the door that may tell them they have to leave the country. This has been called in threat. It remains a threat, and we'll have to see how that turns out, but it was important for our community to speak about the role of these students in our community and the fact that we value them and they are valued components of who we are. The second, of course, was recently when the new administration called out 7 and now 6 specific countries, predominantly Muslim countries, and said that we're not going to allow people here on visas for a period of time, and then we'll look carefully and we'll figure out what to do next. There are students from these countries that come to study at Michigan. Not, again, huge numbers. We're talking about on the order of 100 or so students. In the case of Michigan, we're mainly talking about graduate students from Iran, but people who are in the midst of their studies, contributing to their lab, contributing their productivity of their research, eventually impacting our economy. We're talking now about enhanced vetting, a program of looking way more carefully at nations that you need a visa to visit the United States, and the level of scrutiny that these visa applicants will be asked to undergo in some ways is the equivalent of a strip search in order to be allowed entry into the United States. And then finally, the situation around a special visa program called H-1B visas, where you can come and bring special skills to our country. Often our postdoctoral fellows and our graduate students end up transitioning to H-1B visas after their training period is over. And here's the challenge for us. Not only are we a nation of immigrants, but we're a university of immigrants. 20% of the Michigan faculty was born somewhere else. 20%. Many of our students come here from all around the world, hardworking, talented students. They teach, they learn. They make Michigan, the university, as our first student to come here from another country was in 1840. The first faculty member from abroad to join our university, 1846. So we're a global university. My fear is less for the DACA students and the students from these Muslim countries, although we will do our very best to support them. It's the chilling message that's sent by this level of scrutiny on all immigrants that has the potential to dramatically impede the work of the university, our research and our education. And even more so, I think this approach actually makes our nation less safe. It makes it less safe in many ways. One is the folks that come here to learn and study and do research are actually contributing to the innovation pipeline that comes out of our great universities and helps our economy lead the world, invents new industries, changes in how we deliver healthcare, new devices, new ways of understanding the world. The second is people from around the world impact the education we deliver on our campus. We're in a globalized society with modes of communication and transportation that really make us one global people, certainly for the generation of students we're educating now. And they need to be able to learn about cultures and about people and their traditions from all around the globe, because those are going to be their colleagues, their business partners, their customers, in some instances, their competitors. The less safe part is the students that we educate here that go back to their own country, they take a little bit of America with them. They demystify our country. They sort of draw back the veil of whatever propaganda exists abroad about what America and Americans are like, and now they have firsthand knowledge. And it's way more difficult to hate or distrust or, God forbid, go to war with people that you know and understand, as opposed to people who try to keep you out of their country. So for a variety of reasons, keeping our nation safe, helping drive our economy, and then the success of our university as an educational and research enterprise, immigration is an issue that, even though we're a public institution and it's in the political space, I feel it's necessary as a university leader that we speak out on. The AIU has led the way on this under Mary Sue. Many of the universities represented here have done similar things. But that's really the challenge we're going to confront in this very political era, is how do we walk that line between picking on issues that we can contribute to that make our mission stronger, make our university stronger and more valuable to society without being categorized or dismissed as inappropriately acting in the political space. So with that, I'll hand things off back to Paul or to the panel.
So what's going to happen next is that I'm going to invite the presidents to talk to each other in the presence of the rest of us, to ask each other questions, to comment on what each other have said. Meanwhile, you all ought to be thinking about questions that you want to ask. We have cards available, and if you pass them towards the centers of the various aisles, someone will pick them up, and shortly we will process those questions as well. But first, I actually want to invite the people to my left to raise issues they haven't raised or to make comments on the issues that they have. Harold.
Lee, I have a question for you. You made one very true remark and another very pregnant remark, and I want to see how these relate to each other. The true remark is you said that you know as much as anyone would know about constitutional matters on free speech, and which... No, I think that's true. I actually think that's true. I still read the things that you've written now a long time ago. So I think that's true. But then you followed that by what I call the pregnant remark. You said somehow globalization will cause us to rethink this. And that's a very interesting remark. But I didn't have any real sense of what you meant by that, and I couldn't sort of put my mind around it. So maybe you could say a word about that.
Thanks, Harold. I actually do believe something along those lines, but that's not...
Mike.
Where's your mic? There you go.
So I do believe, I didn't mean to say that, although I will speak to it because it's actually the next thing that follows you picked up. So the thing I was trying to say is I have developed an expertise, and like every faculty member, and suddenly the world has changed and made my expertise too limited to deal with the world as it is. So the Europeans have a right to be forgotten, and they have a different view about hate speech. And Erdogan wants to censor speech, even though the libel lawsuits are brought in other countries, and censorship everywhere. I say anywhere is censorship everywhere. The point is, how do I shift as a faculty member with that expertise to one that has this global dimension to it? Now, I do think over time that as this global communications system evolves, we're going to have to, we're already starting to do that, to think about what free speech principles in a globalized communication system should be. And people have, obviously, just by what I said now, very different views about that. But I was only using it as my personal example of what I think is a broader phenomena. That is, we don't, I'll give you an example, Harold, which I'm sure you're attuned to. It's very hard today to get an economics department or a political science department to hire somebody who's a specialist on the Chinese economy or the political system of China. That was not true 30 years ago. Today, you would think because of the significance of China in the modern world, we should have more expertise, and actually we may have less. And that's what I'm trying to struggle with in the sense of alignment with world issues.
Thank you.
I'd like to compliment Mary Sue on something, because I think that your discussion of the Google Book Project and then the following on the Hathi Trust is, a marvelous example of how every once in a while this university changes the world. Mm-hmm. But let me add something that will change even beyond that. As you may be aware, last week the Bentley Library celebrated the successful digitization of 125 years of the Michigan Daily with strong search capability. That kind of terrifies all of us that served.
You could find everything.
In fact, In fact, I was invited to put in a search term to see,
Yeah.
and I put in no cops, no guns, no code, okay, which was the student rhetoric. And the front page of the daily that came up in the search had headlines, Duderstadt has Elvis's baby. But then to read it, it said, well, of course he didn't. But what I really wanted to do is get your attention so I could slam him on this no cops, no code. But let me be seriously, go to your two just a second. We all look at Google and Amazon and Facebook and so forth as things that are, social communication and media and so forth. But there's a part of it that I think is beginning to disturb a number of us. And I think it was pointed out in a recent book that just came out last year by Kevin Kelly, who is the editor of Wired magazine. He had a conversation with Larry Page, and naturally enough, he asked him, Larry, what's your vision for the future of Google? What do you really want it to be? Thinking that it might be a response like, well, we'd like to capture all the knowledge in the world and make it available to all the world's people. But that wasn't his response. His response was, we would like to build the largest, most powerful artificial intelligence in the world. Okay? Which, if you think about it, means that Google is not helping you as much as you're helping Google's artificial intelligence. Okay? And that's a game changer. Okay, AI clouds, and that's what Facebook is. That's what Amazon is. Okay, and and I think the challenge is with that propagating as rapidly as it does. Somehow that comes into this truth and light mission of our institutions.
Well, absolutely, and I think the other thing that is coming to the fore very much with these companies like Facebook and Google that have huge ability through their algorithms, whatever they use, to bring the information to you, particularly on sort of the news feeds, that they are shaping public opinion in a way because of the construct of the way that articles are tagged and targeted. And it's almost to the point where should we consider these as public utilities? I mean, is this something that we as a country need to be careful about, and it really does intersect with the free speech idea. And
Sure does.
It does, and
Yes, it does.
so I think we're just beginning to grapple with some very large questions that we could not have imagined even a decade ago.
That's right.
That's how fast.
That's a good point.
Yes.
Harold?
I guess another question on the free speech area, but it relates more to the university in a way and to Mark's issue about how is the university supposed to deal with immigration or other kinds of topics like that. And I've always thought that there's a lot more freedom in the constitutional protections of freedom of speech than there is in the freedom that we often associate at universities with academic freedom. Because academic freedom requires responsibility. Okay, that's where it actually comes from, at least in my view. So in trying to think through the struggle, which I have not solved, but the way I try to think about it is this something that would be responsible to say in the classroom?
Yes.
And then if I answer to myself, yes, then I'm ready to say that and not worry about whether someone's going to accuse me of sort of taking sides. Because when you say something in a classroom, that's already, in my view, a responsible arena, if you're treating it properly at all. And so that's a test I've used for myself, that's all. I don't want to make any big deal out of this. But it's a test which maybe it's a little helpful in thinking that thing through.
See, whether it's just a perception or reality, we are getting complaints from some students and from some of their students' parents about whether students are free in the classroom to express their opinions if they happen to be different than what's perceived as a politically associated position taken by their professor. And to me, that's a little bit insulting to the professor to think that the majority of faculty don't keep an open mind. I think that they do, and that you can separate your own opinions, which we all have, from the quality and rigor of an argument that a student's making, and reward the student for the latter and not impose your view on them. But we're hearing that criticism a lot, internally and externally.
So this is in my view, this is a problem because obviously a university is committed to having many, many voices, and I have been quite confident in the commitment of universities across the country to that. But the charge of political correctness has now been utilized. It's been seized by people who have very different agendas than trying to widen the viewpoint. And so we are in a time in which what we're basically facing is an anti-intellectual, anti-expert, and this criticism, which has already got some circulation, I think is being seized by that group, a very big problem and a threat. I think the question Harold raises, and Mark, you raised it, it's a profound question. To what extent should the university get involved in issues of the time, in the outside world, whatever we call it? To what extent are you moving into the political realm? So my view is that we've been really great, as I said in my remarks, in allowing faculty to pursue scholarship, and mostly on a highly individual basis. A little bit we have protected, not protected, but we've encouraged faculty and groups of faculty and commercialization of knowledge to move into the public sphere and to take action. What no university has done is to say the bringing of the knowledge and the capacities of the intellectual world into the public sphere is actually a mission of the institution. We more or less let it happen. Medical schools are unique in this sense. They have basic research and they have practice. My view increasingly is that we need to think about this as a kind of fourth mission of the university. If you do that, if you start to build up the capacity to participate in the outside world with partnerships, because we actually don't have the power to do it ourselves, you then run squarely into this question. What is politicization and what is responsible participation in the society?
See, that hits on a question that you focused on, Harold, that I was going to try to provoke you to speak more about. You know, we're in this era where some people think facts don't matter, but obviously we know that in the long run they do. How do we turn that conversation around? So, you know, we sit on top of institutions with tremendous expertise to offer the world, and I don't think we pretend to be the people making decisions on behalf of society, but rather providing information to those that represent us or to our fellow citizens to inform their decisions. But somehow, as you pointed out in your eloquent comments, facts don't have the same currency they might have at one time.
Well, it seems to me it's always very difficult to know when a university as an institution, as opposed to individual faculty members at a university or individual students, on what kinds of issues should it speak out, and without fear of any kind, but just commitment. And there it seems to me the test is understanding what the university is and what threatens its foundations as you understand it and what doesn't. So there are all kinds of public issues which don't threaten the university in any way, at least the way I think about it. And we have, in my view, no business really mobilizing ourselves to deal with it. But if a situation comes around, like I think it's threatening to, we'll have to wait and see, where we really think that what's abroad, whether it's not being able to distinguish between facts and fancy and so on, really hits at the foundation of who we are, then it doesn't matter if some people accuse us of being political or taking sides, because we are speaking in our own minds of what it is that really makes us an institution at all. I'm a really great believer in the social, as I said in my remarks, social division of labor. We can't be everything or we'll be nothing, but we can decide what we want to be. And on those issues, when those are threatened, I think it's, in my mind, not a political issue anymore. And if people accuse us, they accuse us. I mean, they accuse us anyway.
Yeah.
It's true.
You do.
Let's move to questions that will be curated by Professor Alcock. Here they come.
I probably don't need a mic, but, okay, there we go. All right, we're starting with the questions, and
Yes, she
first
does.
off, someone from Public Policy 615. Stand up.
My name is Bader. I'm a first-year PhD student in architecture. My question is, what can American higher...
Hold your mic up.
my question is, what can American higher education learn from its global counterparts?
From what?
From what?
Its global counterparts. Globally, international universities. What can American universities learn from them?
Let me respond to that in an operational way. For the last decade or more, I have co-chaired a Davos-like meeting of university presidents of leading universities from around the world every 2 years in Switzerland, higher above Montreux. And we have such a meeting coming up in June. We have about 24 presidents from the top universities in the world. We asked them to write a paper that will then form the basis for several days of argument, and finally a book comes out of it. The paper that we've asked them to write for this June is imagine what your university will be in the year 2030, and then tell us how you intend either to move toward that future or avoid it, okay? But I'll tell you that what we've found in doing things like this over several previous meetings is a bit of a convergence. The National University of Singapore is beginning to sound more like the University of Munich, it's beginning to sound more like Berkeley, and maybe that's because these folks are kind of chatting among each other, or maybe that's because a faculty member that used to discuss issues with colleagues across the hall is now discussing them on the other side of the world. But there does seem to be a convergence of how they're beginning to think about their institutions.
All right, next question.
Hi, my name is Heather. I'm a freshman currently in LS&A, and my question for you is, to you, what would be an ideal campus climate, and considering that many factors play into the current climate, how can a university president respond in a moral and effective way?
Oh, yes.
So,
There you go, Chief.
yeah, thanks a lot. So obviously that's a central question that we're struggling with as a community, right now. To me, the ideal climate would be one in which the individual can choose how they spend their time, whether they're with people that are of like mind or people that are more diverse in their background and experiences, where in both instances they feel similarly comfortable and valued and included. So I'm not sure human evolution will ever let us get to that ideal. But I do think by identifying instances where different members of our community lack that privilege of really being whole and complete and equal members of every group they're in, whether it's a like or a diverse group, by pointing that out, we take steps in the way of getting there. Because I'm enough of an idealist to think that most members of our community want to live in a world where everybody's treated fairly. But that is really the defining cultural challenge of our campus community.
I think universities are kind of complex adaptive systems. There's no perfect answer to your question. I think I would retire somehow if I could have an answer to that question. But it's a complex adaptive system. And I think that's what you were just saying, that you learn as you go. It's not like you have some grand plan and it's very clear exactly what you're going to do every day. The system moves back and forth. You react to things. You try to make things a little bit better, and you keep on learning. And as you've learned more and more, the world changes, and you have to learn again. And so I think it's a way of saying I have no real answer to your question, but it is important to think of these institutions as adaptive over time.
Thank you. Next question.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth, and I'm a PhD student in English language and literature. Each of you, as president of a major university, has had access to significant resources and influence to make change. For those university citizens, whether students, faculty, or staff, without such exceptional access and power, who wish to contribute to changing their institution for the better, what do you think is the most effective way to begin that work?
I'm not sure I understand the question, but let me try. Is the assumption of your question that university presidents have great power and they can change institutions? Because I will abuse you. I will abuse you of that notion instantly. We have no power, really. We have the bully pulpit, but we have to work with. This is one of the things I loved about my university experiences has been you have to negotiate. You have to work with your faculty. You have to persuade. You have to get the best ideas. You have to know that unless you can find this way of listening and hearing and being willing to change your mind or gaining ideas from other people, that you can't ever be successful. So I'm not sure if that gets at it. I mean, change is hard and slow. Particularly depending on, what the topic is that you're trying to get people to pay more attention to or to change culture or whatever. But university presidents don't say, thou shalt do X, and, people say, well, maybe not. I mean, exactly. It's always a negotiation.
Let me follow on to that, and I think it kind of resonates with what Harold said as well. Universities are not top-down, they're bottom-up. They're complex adaptive systems. Sometimes they're good at repelling invasive species, okay? But you think of them kind of like a rainforest. And what the bottom-up means students, it means faculty, it means staff in many cases. Students have changed this university time after time after time. My wife and I arrived in the late 1960s, okay? And so, that was change, but it was all bottom up. Top-down doesn't work very well with institutions like this.
And a next question.
Hi. Hi, I'm Jandy Kelly, a third-year doctoral student in higher education, and this is a question on behalf of an audience member. This event is framed as the bargain between research universities and society. But the University of Michigan has 2 campuses who do not focus primarily on research. And even in Ann Arbor, most of our revenue comes from teaching, and arguably, one of our main contributions to society stems from teaching as well. Is it time to raise our teaching mission to equal status with our research mission?
Yeah, I think it actually is. So, one of the distinguishing characteristics of a great research university is those 2 activities empower and inform one another. So tomorrow morning, Saturday morning, I'm speaking to a group of admitted students and their parents, and I'm going to explain to them why should they come to the University of Michigan. They'll have many choices. These are talented students, and it's because there's something special about learning from a professor that's also a scholar in their field. You learn how to frame questions, how to have a healthy respect for what you don't know, actually how to have skepticism for what other people tell you that's right and often turns out to be incorrect in the fullness of time, and to be able to participate in the process of discovery as a student. Whether it's serving as a research assistant for an economics professor or working in a biomedical research lab. So these missions are entwined. Many great professors learn by teaching. They learn the questions that come from somebody that's naive, not in a pejorative sense, to the discipline they're teaching, and a light bulb goes on, because all disciplines have dirty little secrets that the disciplinarians agree to ignore because we don't know the answer. But a student will ask that annoying question, and off you go to the races. One thing about Michigan compared to many of the other universities I've worked, a significant fraction of the outstanding researchers at this university apply much of the same creativity to their teaching as they do to their research. So I don't really accept the premise that they're such different and unrelated things as you would think.
President Shapiro, go ahead.
I'd like to make an additional comment here. If you think not only of the University of Michigan, but you think of higher education overall, I hesitate to use a biological analogy with my colleagues in the far left here who really know something, but it is an ecosystem. And not everybody plays the same role. And there's different combinations of roles in different kinds of institutions. And that's, I think, one of the strengths of American higher education. because there's different students with different desires, different attitudes, and so on. And it's really a great strength. And Michigan has its place in that. It's just been described. I'm not going to try to repeat that. But if someone wants a different combination of things, it's easily available in our system. And I think that's one of the strengths of American higher education.
And that's also one of the great things about having a campus in Flint and a campus in Dearborn. You know, they're different, and they're representative of some of the different types of educational opportunities that we're lucky to have in the United States. You know, different communities, different purposes, different emphases.
Well, another question from the audience that I think picks up from that is, what, in your opinion, is the greatest challenge facing all of higher education today? And do you think the greatest challenge facing the University of Michigan specifically is the same or similar, or is it different?
It sounds like our lightning round, doesn't it?
That's the lightning round.
We'll get to the lightning round in just a moment, Jim. But
We're getting, yeah.
You know, I don't want to speak directly for the University of Michigan. Mark's here, and I want him to speak for the University of Michigan in this respect. But if you were to ask me what the greatest challenge, very long term, for higher education, it has to do with everything from childcare through K-12. That's where the really big issue is, in my view, looking very long term. Now, it's not a University of Michigan responsibility per se, but that's, if you were to ask me what the great challenge is, that's the great challenge. Are we going to have a sufficient number of students who, both from a social, cultural, and every other perspective, will really come prepared to take advantage of what universities like Michigan have to offer other universities? To me, that's, I don't have an answer to the question. I'd identify that as an issue.
Let me add to that, but in a different way. How many of you are millennials between the ages of, 18 and 34? Okay.
Which millennium?
Yeah. Your life expectancy is well into your 90s. A child born today will have a life expectancy, 50-50 chance of at least 100 and probably longer. Okay, now think about that for a second. The first thing is that if you think you're going to retire at age 65 or 70, you're crazy, because no society will have enough resources to support you for that much longer. Okay, so what that says is you're going to have to keep working until you're 80, maybe if you're born 90. Well, what we teach you at age 20 ain't going to hack it when you're that old. So what that says is these institutions are going to have to step up to the plate and be prepared to provide serious lifelong learning to keep this society working. Okay, and that is a major cultural change for us. The old three-phase life where you go to college and learn when you're young, you then work for a number of years, then you kind of sit back and go to Florida to the villages. We've got to be in the game, and you've got to be in the game with universities throughout your life, and that's a major change.
I don't know if it's good or bad, but I can speak to this.
So let me add a couple of things. So, 10 years ago and 5 years ago, there was a view, there still is to some extent, that what has happened to newspapers in the United States and traditional media was about to happen to universities. That is, it would undermine the business model of universities. People would no longer come. You could do it for a lot less online, etc. Every faculty member would become the teaching assistant of a truly gifted online teacher who would then teach for a fraction of what tuition costs. I am staking my life on the proposition that that is not true, that actually will not happen. That what has happened to traditional media, we are not the last institutions in the society to have that happen. So I'm confident about that future. I also think there is now, as Harold strongly argued and Mark on his issue, I think there is actually a possible existential threat emerging to universities because of the nature of political action today. I don't want to overstate that because I think it's a serious problem, but I think it's potentially an existential threat. The main goal of the university is to adjust its intellectual life to what are the most important questions facing humanity. We try to understand what is happening in the world. We advance knowledge. We communicate that to the next generation. As long as that vitality is there, and I'm convinced that is today, we will be fine. But that's not easy to do, so you have to work at it.
So I want to note that one of the things you have to be a president of the University of Michigan is to respond to questions about what the university might do by saying, do more. This is a very ambitious group of people with respect to the institutions that they have led. And on that note, we're going to turn to our lightning round, which is each of you, I guess starting again with President Shapiro, what has changed the most at the University of Michigan since the time you were its president? 1 minute, no more.
Well, I will just use a minute to say how much has changed since I was a young assistant professor here in 1964. The place is just vastly more dynamic, vastly better than it was when I came, and especially in the last 30 years, that's how long it is since I was president. It's just changed in a dramatic way, and I just give credit to my colleagues here on the left for that.
Jim?
I think that what I have seen is the enormous challenge that has been building toward our fundamental mission of truth and light. And what I mean by that is the challenge of sustaining our fundamental roles of discovering truth through our scholarship and using it to enlighten society through our teaching in an era of alt-truth, public misunderstanding, and hostility toward the university. That's nothing I would have seen 40 years ago.
Lee?
I mean, it's a fantastic and great institution. It's always better than it was, will continue to be that. Aside from the political thing, which I think is unique in my lifetime, I would say it's the decline in public support for public universities. That it's been, heading in this direction, but I think it's taken a dip, and that's a serious matter.
Sue?
So I've only been away less than 3 years, but I, like Lee, perhaps more strongly than Lee, believe that there is an existential threat. But I think it's to both public and private universities because of the lessening of public confidence in higher education and the elites in higher education. The budget proposals to research that are the lifeblood of this institution will demolish what we are and what private institutions are as well. And our inability to recognize as a nation that we are built on the talent of going out and getting the best talent in the world, wherever it is, will make us far more, will just change us in ways that are indescribable. That is what I worry about every single day.
Wow, that's awful heavy.
Sorry.
So, these folks to my right have a scope to consider that spans decades, dating back to the 1960s, like when I was 7 years old. But I've got a very easy answer because I've only been here 3 years. So you asked me what's changed. Our football team wins.
I think only one of us has the national championship in
When did Columbia win a national championship?
In Michigan.
I know.
That's really unfair, Mark.
Yes, but who recruited that team?
No.
I had not imagined
Whatever
that this
happens
conversation.
in your time is yours.
I had not imagined that this conversation would end here, but so it has. I'd like to invite Gary Krenz, who is the director of the Bicentennial Office, to come up and conclude the proceedings.
Thanks, Paul. And please, again, let's please thank our presidents, Harold Shapiro, Jim Biggerstadt, Lee Bollinger, Mary Sue Comer, and Mark Schlissel. Great. So this was really a remarkable conversation, and I know I felt privileged to be able to attend to it. I don't want to go back to anything too heavy after the way this concluded, but I did want to return for just a moment to the issue that President Shapiro raised back at the top of this event, and that has had such a presence throughout, and namely that is the functioning of universities in an environment where the idea of post-truth regime is taken seriously, where alternative fact is part of the parlance of the day, and where we must ask if the university has a political role around issues of knowledge. So, Michigan's one-time faculty member, the great American philosopher John Dewey, once wrote, "The function of the university is the truth function." He did this in the context of discussing academic freedom. "A university worthy of the name," Dewey said, "holds this truth function as a public trust, and it maintains this trust on the basis of the academic freedom that is ensured to it by society, academic freedom being the essential framework for the pursuit of truth with disciplinary rigor." Now, if we believe Dewey, and clearly President Bollinger and President Coleman, this is an existential issue. And however else the bargain between research universities and society evolves, it would seem that we, universities and society, dare not lose this connection. That society has evolved institutions like universities to be both servants and critics is a tremendous accomplishment of political will, but one that perhaps is understandably, as President Shapiro said, fragile in the very way that democracy can be fragile. So as we leave here today, I ask us all to work to rededicate that will, which has also been so much of today's discussion. Now, just a couple of housekeeping matters. I want to remind you that this important exploration of the evolving bargain will continue on June 26th with a discussion among the leaders of some of the world's most prestigious universities, moderated by Ruth Simmons, President Emerita of Brown University. I hope you will take part in other events that are part of our Bicentennial Spring Festival. Please check out this evening's Feast of Ideas, in which U of M faculty will be out around the community delivering short talks on a range of fascinating topics. And tomorrow afternoon from 3 to 6 is the Community of Culture Festival up on North Campus. I hope you'll be able to attend that. Also, right after the event, we have a reception out in the lobby. So again, many thanks to our presidents for their discussion and sharing the conversation with us. Thank you to Bicentennial Professors Paul Courant and Sue Alcock for their leadership of this presidential colloquium and their work with the panel. Thank you to the students of Public Policy Education 615 and my students in Philosophy 162 for their questions. And thank you all for joining us today.